Bye, darling. Bye, darling. I love you.
And that's how we start a podcast. Oh, dear me. Okay, so we'll record all of the beginning bits later, so don't worry about that. So we're just going to dive straight in. So thank you both for joining us today. We're really excited to finally wangle getting you both in the room at the same time.
It's the
Great
first
work.
time anyone's seen us both in the same room at the same time. This is the ultimate dispelling of the myth that we're actually the same human.
Yes. Well, I think we've more proposed that we felt like we were brothers from another mother from the very first time I met you. You're like, he looks a bit like me. He sounds a bit like me. I think he's basically saying the same thing as me.
So
I
you
mean,
didn't
now he's
really
proved
need both
himself.
of us, Michelle. You're just being greedy.
No, I know.
No,
Yes,
well,
we're
latterly
here.
he's proved himself to be more intelligent and articulate. So now he's like my slightly annoying brother from another mother.
Same shit, different pirates.
Same shit, but slightly better said. You know, oh, damn.
Cool. James, do you want to ask the first question?
And I don't know who's going to answer. I think we just wing it, shall we?
Dive in.
Yes. So if you think back over all that you've done, careers, various projects, when did you come to a point where you thought work is a bit fucked?
Go on, Samo, lean in.
I spent a long time, all my life, trying to work towards some kind of change. I think that I've always understood that was the brief. We had to do good in the world, and there was an awful lot of things that seemed ungood. So by proxy, by virtue of my upbringing in inner city South London, but born to these kind of middle class parents, and my dad died. So then I had this duality of experience. I saw the eyes through that which I'd grown up with, and then through my very close friends, and you could really see the disparity of all. So it seemed like the brief was really clear, and everyone surely wants to make things better. And so, you know, I used to run raves that were going to save the world, and then I ran this kind of Don't Panic, which was going to change the world, and that morphed into a thing called Liberty, which is going to change the world for young people. And it seemed like this ongoing trajectory, and everyone, of course, was on board with the same thing. And then eventually, you got kind of senior, and you started to not just work with your peers and same age range, you were working with leaders and people who ran businesses, and then eventually like local politicians, and then ministers, and then eventually you found yourself in the rooms where power should lie and good change should come from. And at first I thought it was just my naivety or my lack of experience. And I left those meetings thinking, God, no one seems to know what they're doing. And I thought, no, that's just me. I'm being arrogant. But then eventually you've been in enough rooms with enough people and you realize no one fucking knows what they're doing. And there isn't really a grand plan. And it seems like maybe that was a thing of the past, like large ideas that have broad buy-in collectively to make things better. And I remember just these feelings of like woe and dread coming back from meetings that, you know, I really thought I'd arrived, you know, in C-suites and Westminster, and like coming back thinking, fuck, you know, I wouldn't give any of them a job, let alone trust them. And remember coming back to Liberty and increasingly thinking that we weren't just this tiny little like blip on the outer edges, and more it ended up being empowering, I think, because I thought, God, we've actually got some answers, and there really aren't there. And I think my real arrival in Westminster kind of politics, or being invited, having an advisory capacity in that role, also coincided with the release of The Thick of It. You know, and the satire couldn't have been more accurate about the worlds we were in, and the circular conversations that we watched, and the waste of human energy and resource, and just fucking intelligence, and how much intelligence was wasted at the heads of these businesses that I thought were going to be my clients to sell shit no one needs. And then there was a lack of intelligence in the areas in the world that you needed people to be doing stuff. And yeah, this void became a bit of a chasm in which I wondered a lot about how to make things better.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, like I'm Sam was always a lot cooler than me, and that is the distinction, I think. But like so the first, like the word rave still makes me feel distinctly uncomfortable. But
You should come to one, you'd enjoy it.
I'm totally up for it, mate, as long as you hold my hand. But the starting, so I was a very, very good boy. Basically, I was full geek mode, as well as being pretty sporty, and you know, kind of very good boy at school, very good boy at university. Did like did well at sport, and kind of was pretty well steeped in the story for throughout that period. Like the idea that like if I sort of played by the rules, I was the kind of person who sort of didn't really question whether the rules were right or not. I just played by them and generally won because I have every privilege and advantage in the book, right? Like, and I think it was really like I stumbled into the advertising industry. Was doing pretty well there, but just started to ask these questions about like what are we actually doing here? And I remember like I think my first boss described my job to me by saying, what you got to remember is the average consumer sees something like 3,000 commercial messages a day, and your job is to cut through that. You've got to make yours the best. And for a few years, I guess I was working with the second half of that sentence, and in true white boy mode, kind of making mine the best and competing and rising above. And then I started to ask questions about the first half of the sentence, started to go, what are we doing to ourselves when we tell ourselves we're consumers 3,000 odd times a day? And by the way, the latest estimates are anything up to 10,000 for certain cohorts in certain places. Like, and then I guess sort of 2008, 2009, around the time that of the Copenhagen climate negotiations, but in the sort of as the Labour government was sort of starting to run out of steam, I think I was just in the there was some triggers, but I was just in the kind of moment of hang on, like financial crisis, obviously, like all of that. I just got to this point of going, hang on, I actually don't believe this story that I am essentially a priest of. Like I don't see this anymore as a set of rules that I don't need to question and that I need to win by, because that will create a rising tide that lifts all boats. That was the kind of premise before that I had sort of accepted. I sort of gradually at first, and then suddenly, when hang on a minute, this isn't a story that can work. The idea that self-interest will add up to collective interest, which I now name as the logic of the consumer story, isn't going to work. And that was a very dark and painful time for me, because I'd been such a good boy, and so I went through a much more well, I don't know. We never really talked about it, but I think I went through a much sort of more disillusion, like more painful disillusionment moment, and it took a lot longer for me to come out the other side with questions around how do we use the same skills and creativity, but to invite everyone into their agency as citizens. How do we step into a bigger story of ourselves and create that bigger story of ourselves, and allow that story of people as consumers, allow the logic that self-interest will add up to collective interest, that I think is why we had and still have those behaviors in the corridors of power that Sam talks about, is because like what humans do is we get trapped in stories. We want to be good, but we get trapped in stories of how to be good. And the story of how to be good for the last 80 years or so has been the way to channel self-interest to add up to collective interest is the way to be good. And that is what is now falling apart at a very fundamental level. And it took me, and I still think I'm naming that. I still think I'm realizing in your language that work is fucked, and more sort of flesh on the bones of that. But that moment, sort of that time, 2008, 2010, couple of years was at least the kind of realization of the darkness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I can. There's a few moments that I can really get on board with that, and then just for the sake of it, I think I want to argue some things too. I deeply like resonate with that idea of the stories, and so we get on board with the stories, and we don't even know that we're necessarily taking part in them or becoming active in them, and therefore then we take responsibility for them and we perpetuate them. And when I first became an entrepreneur, I found that really difficult. It was a word I couldn't spell. You know, it sounded fancy. I couldn't actually say it with any kind of degree of ownership. And And there was a story that I couldn't fully get on board with because it seemed to represent so many things that I kind of brought up or thought that felt I stood against, which was, like greed and self-advancement, and it didn't line up with my ideas of change until there was a notion of changing that story. And that does feel very possible. There are these moments when you really can shift it. And all of a sudden, I thought I invented social enterprise long before I heard it. I was like, wait a minute, I'm not going to get on board with this fucking story. I'm going to do something quite different. And the moment it hit me was, we were 3 years into Liberty, and we had our first ever business advisor. And they came to the office and they sat us down, looked at the business plan, looked at the finances, and they said, what's your exit strategy? I was like, what a very funny question. Perhaps they haven't observed the health and safety requirements. So I took them to the fire escape. and she looked at me going, well, what are you doing? What's your actual exit strategy? And I was like, what does she mean? What have I got wrong? What's the thing? So I was like, do you want to see the front door? I mean, you came in through that. What are you thinking? We all leave at 5:30? I don't know. And she explained to me what exit is. And I'm like, what a strange thing. But, I haven't done this for 3 years, and with the intention of doing it like it's another 3 years at least, to then fucking sell it. Like, who would do that? I thought to myself. And then you realize I wasn't at that part of the dominant narrative, which is very often that success if you're going to start some kind of business is to exit. To exit means to sell it, create value in financial terms more than anything else. And you realize how that dominant narrative is I really hear that. And it struck me, and I really didn't want to be part of that. And so my notion was then, well, the value that we create is in absolutely other areas, these lives, these kids' journeys, the shift we've made in these organizations into something more meaningful. How do we measure that? And so that's what I decided, and I felt a profound sense of agency in conflict. And I think there's something really interesting. I like your stance. I like the radicalization of it. But when we do see these things, and when we do feel like we're in stories that are contrary to our beliefs and values, then, and we are in this moment, I think John's right, there's a profound moment. And for a long time, I think the narrative is around, what do we stand for? And that's been quite useful, certainly in my world of, purpose-driven projects. But I think we're in a moment of what do you stand up to? And there's a fight to be had. And it's not so radical, right? Choose which side you're on. But there is a fight to be had for what you believe in, and it helped me enormously. And it's a sense of my ego at the time. I was like, right, well, wait a minute, I'm going to invent a new kind of business, and it's going to be purpose driven, and And I did for 2 years think I'd invented social enterprise until I realized there were thousands of them. And so I got on board with that story. And then you get to write your story, you get to choose your story, you get to choose the story that you're within. And what I think the thing that surfaces for me is it's our responsibility to be aware of the stories we're in and not to acquiesce to just the fact that there are these large stories and we get caught up in them.
So many people don't realize that they're in it.
No. And I think that was the first bit of the story. When you realize that everyone was making it up, it was like the veil being lifted. And it's like, oh. And so actually the problem is no one's being particularly honest. You ask a room of any kind of professionals who's suffering from imposter syndrome, the whole room puts their hand up, and then you realize we're all in this collective lie. And so how do you professionalize making it up, and enable people to step out of the, willful blindness, as it's Margaret Heffernan put it.
I think just to add a little, I think I agree that we are now in a moment of what do you stand up to. And I think this is particularly where I'm getting to at the end of as a new year begins, 2024, a year when nearly half the world's population goes to the polls. Like this is a critical time. And the way I would describe what's happening right now is that this consumer story, as I've described it, this idea that self-interest will add up to collective interest, and therefore that to be good is to participate in that world, is so obviously broken, and yet we are still trying to sustain it. That and what is happening as that story becomes less and less tenable is that an older, the previous, the much darker story, what I would call the subject story, the authoritarian story, the kind of paternalistic story, the logic of the story that says the system is broken and we will protect you, is rising very, very powerfully all over the world. And the great danger in this moment in time, I think, is that we have there is a risk of the choice of 2024 being presented as a binary, where you choose either to stay with the existing consumer story and try and sort of make it work, or you go to the subject story. And we've seen this in Argentina already, the choice between Javier Milei and the finance minister of the declining government and economy that went before. It's too obviously visible in Trump versus Biden, but and so on and so on. But as Sam says, the what we have to do, I think, is we have to get to a place where we reject the choice between the people who will pretend that everything's fine and we just have to keep doing what we're doing and reform it, and the strong man who will protect us, but who will at least acknowledge that things aren't working anymore. And we have to step into a story that we have to take responsibility ourselves to step into a story that says, like, the system is broken, and the best way to fix it is for everyone to get involved. We need everyone on the pitch in this time, and we need to figure out what the opportunities and the responses are. So that's where I see the moment.
Yeah. I mean, I can just carry on here, but Michelle and James, I don't want to cut you out of this lovely loop that you've brought us into, and I'll just start debating.
I know, it's like, this is fun. I can watch this all day. Okay.
I would argue slightly, just to then see what you guys think. I mean, John, I'm a total fan of this from the moment that I met you and have cited your work and sit here with my copy of Citizens you signed for my kids. That sits next to my copy of Good Girl Deprogramming. I have a shelf of books for my girls to grow up and understand the world better through. But I sometimes advocate the story as you present it, and I see people struggle because it's to me it's perfect framing, and provides it's one of the most consistent and comprehensive answers. And when I watch people struggle, and what my work has been about, I see that people are sometimes limited by their capacity to get to the narrative that you're presenting, because actually for them it's the choices between the known and the unknown. And I really feel this is a thing that we need to get to grips with, because it's largely thought there are 4 types of change for the human psyche, but I see it more like there's 2, because the first 3 can all be grouped into one set, right? There's evolutionary change and conflict change and legacy change, I think, is their names, but largely change when you fucking have to because you don't have any choice. COVID hits, or you can't use this stuff anymore, it's just run out, or you're 2 years older. And then there's teleological change, which is the one which you choose. And that's the hardest one for human beings, because yes, it makes sense. And of course, intellectually, we want to go that way, but you have to step in consciously to a space of the unknown. It's not change itself that people are scared of, I've come to learn. It's the unknown as to whether or not it's going to work. That's the fucking bit that we all resist and we retract from. So intellectually, yes, of course. Cognitively, totally. But emotionally, no. And therefore, it becomes a limiting thing. And you're asking people to move from perceived stability, even if it's a shit show, to perceived instability, even if it's better. And it's better, and I know it's better, but you're going to have to tolerate that horrible place. All human action is can be boiled down. It's not too reductionist to say this, into attract or avoid, and we're permanently going between these 2 states. And the work I've been doing around uncertainty suggests to me that we need to be able to encourage people to spend more time in a middle state, which could be summed up as available. I'm trying very hard to not be pulled between these 2 binaries and attract and avoid, and that's what strongman dictatorships and very largely late stage capitalist advertising will continue to try and pull us into. And I think part of our work is to increase people's ability to stay in the middle space of availableness for new ideas or thought or doubt or growth or discovery or whatever those things are, because it's in there some new thinking has got to emerge. And we need to kind of recognize the capacity of how we're always being catapulted between those 2 states. And the most recent bit of, as you're talking about New Year, we've been doing a survey based on the thousands of people who've gone through Uncertainty Experts, and the question that we've asked in firms, and I've had about 2,500 responses to this, large firms, internationally based. And the question we ask is, in a moment of profound uncertainty, would you rather be seen as decisive, even if that leads to a bad outcome, or indecisive, if that led to a positive outcome? The average response is 70% of people say decisive, knowing that it's going to lead them to a negative outcome. But when you segment the data and you just pull out leadership teams, it goes to 90%. And so that kind of gives me a clue, right? That's almost like the classic INSEAD MBA mindset of the top of businesses. It's got us to a place where, indecision is what will kill. We need to be decisive. Give me the black and white of it all. And yet knowing full well, and you know this because I've talked about before, the previous studies tell us that people prefer pain, physical pain, emotional pain, and loss to uncertainty. So it feels like it's a useful, slightly annoying, but tectonic bit of this, because we're asking people to make this choice that we think intellectually is a court, but we have to take into account the horror show of the emotions of asking people to step into the unknown, even if the known is worse than what you presently have.
I feel like I want you guys to like explicitly nudge us. I think we've sort of strolled into your second phase of
We've answered the
conversation.
second question, so it's fine. I was like, so let's have a look. Yes, what are you doing about this now? So pretty much fixing the world. So when
I feel like there's a bit more to like, I was just going to say, because I think Sam, maybe like uncertainty experts is sort of where you've taken this now. Do you? I mean, maybe just like, yeah, I think where I'm at now is like 18 months after Citizens came out, the book, I'm kind of going. I think where I'm at now is recalibrating for a specific understanding of this moment in time and 2024 specifically. And I think I'm very close to what you're saying. And I don't exactly know what I'm going to do off the back of that. One of the things I'm working with various storytellers actually at the moment to try and go like, how do we make the citizen, what I call the citizen story, the idea that actually the solution to our challenges is that all of us are smarter than any of us. That's the logic we have to lean into, rather than that anyone will come to save us, or that we should pretend that the system's fine. But I think the meeting point of our work is the idea of uncertainty, which is where you've leaned in like really specifically. I think the way I read that, I'm really struck by, and I really love that there's a family therapist originally who was working in the 70s called Barry Mason, who wrote a paper called Towards Positions of Safe Uncertainty.
Right.
And reference.
Yeah. Send out the reading list with this podcast, please. What Mason does is he distinguishes between safety and certainty, and I think this is really helpful. Because in so doing, he basically says like 2x2 matrix: safety and unsafety, and certainty and uncertainty. And he says like anyone who comes for therapy, like I'm really massively brushstroking this, right? But broadly, anyone who comes for therapy is in one of two mindsets. They're either unsafe, uncertain, I don't know what to do, or they're unsafe, certain, I'm bad and I know I am. And what they think they want in that situation is safe certainty. Tell me what to do to fix it, or protect me. And what Mason says is that safe certainty doesn't exist. The only safe certainty is death. And so what the role of the therapist has to become is the creation of safe uncertainty. The sort of and I translate this into kind of leadership. And one of my favorite stories in the research for the book, and one that I've become increasingly kind of obsessed by, is the Taiwanese government's COVID response, which is so different from anything else anywhere in the world, but because they essentially crowdsourced it. But the starting point for that response was the president of the country giving a speech where she said, we basically said, and I'm paraphrasing again, but pretty closely, like, we don't know how to get through this, but what we do know is that we'll get through it best if we have everyone involved. And I think that for me, like, I think that sort of frame might be a way through a way to define that middle ground that you're talking about, I would hope, which is like, you can name the scale of the challenge if you at least name that spirit of collaboration as a way through. What I worry about sometimes with the language of that kind of middle space or whatever, without that without that specificity, and I'm not saying this is what you're doing, because I think actually precisely by doing the uncertainty experts, by building people's capacity to stay in uncertainty, you are leading into this. But what I worry about often with the language of the kind of middle ground thing is that it's saying like it's sort of saying we can pretend things aren't as bad or as broken as they are, and find and sort of shepherd people through. And I think that the training of the leaders and so forth that you speak to, one aspect of it is the training of the leaders and the sort of the role that we are tempted to step into as leaders in finding the way through for people instead of finding the way through with people. But the other aspect of it is the extent to which we as the people kind of project that space, project that desire. There's an astonishing line in the musical Hamilton, the song called "The Room Where It Happens," which is like epic, right? And the line is, we want our leaders to save the day, but we don't get a say in what they trade away. And that, I think, expresses so much of the kind of cultural moment that we're in and that we have to challenge. Like, it's not just on the people in positions of leadership to lead differently, it's also on the rest of us to require a different form of leadership of them.
Yes. And I think a lot of the problem is, and I write about this in my book, that there's almost a campaign of getting people not to be interested in politics because they're all the same. They all, they're selfish, greedy bastards, and so there's no point getting involved because they're going to do what they're going to do. And that narrative of learned helplessness around that. And I've always been one of those absolute weirdos that writes to my MP all the time. I'm sure she's sick of me. But it's like, what's one person going to do writing to the MP? But that's exactly it. Multiple one persons can change stuff. And again, another big thing that I'm really keen on is that critical thinking. Don't believe everything that you hear or think or know, because there's always another side to it.
Yeah, I really liked from getting your book and explaining to the girls where you were coming from, and it's really made me check myself, and suddenly be aware that I used the phrase "good girl" to them, and so how quickly those stories that John was talking about early on begin, right? The narrative. First present my youngest daughter ever got was not from me, I'm happy to say, was a pink Minnie Mouse Hoover. Like every single part of everything that we're talking about across all three of our books was encapsulated in this one priming device that swiftly disappeared. And so that sense of resistance is really important, but applied resistance is, I think, what we're getting to, because again, I think the danger is, I really agree with everything we're saying, but I think what I'm trying to invite is not necessarily getting lost in the middle space or not taking the sides, which is necessary, but it's the recognition of how difficult this is and why it goes wrong. Because if we keep thinking, well, this is a good idea, then we get frustrated that it doesn't happen. Like, of course, that's what smart people should do. We should totally crowdsource this. Brilliant. But emotionally, it's really fucking hard. And that's the bit that surprised me. If you ask people, and we know this, we ask people, what do you think about uncertainty? And they'll say, it's often a place of growth, and it can be really unsettling. And about 50-50, there's a response between positive and negative sentiments. If you ask people, how does uncertainty make them feel? The consistent response is 95% of people will use negative adjectives to describe their emotions. So there's this real shift between it. And if we don't take this into account, you'll leave people behind in subconscious ways, and that becomes really demotivating. You know what it's like when we've all said some really good ideas and you turn around and then people haven't shown up. You're like, what? And we need to win this argument in emotional and cognitive terms, because it's that horrible bit of this big new idea and a narrative that seems really exciting and compelling to us does represent fear to lots of people, and And without that, I don't know why we're not going to bring the majority with us. John, the question that really aligns to that lovely approach about we're going to do this better together, we've seen emerge in our own research. One of the things that really stood out very early on was one of our first interviewees, and they said the trouble is the only honest answer at the moment is I don't know, but I don't know how to say that as a leader. Like, and it's stayed within my mind, and I keep saying it on every stage or platform I've been given the chance. How the fuck does anybody say I don't know in an authentic and inspiring way? And that really puzzled me and delighted me, really, as a leadership challenge. And then in speaking to more people, you realize actually no one wants to fucking hear I don't know either. And this is the problem. I can make the case like you. We need more leaders to be able to say I don't know. Yeah, you and me agree with that. But try and ask anyone who's being led and they're in a team, do you want to hear from your leader that they don't know? That can be deeply destabilizing. And I might say yes because that's the direction we're going, but it's a big part of me deep down in my gut doesn't want to hear that either. And so it evolved my opportunity to say beyond, right? It's very rare that you can find leaders that I don't know in a compelling way, in an inspirational way, and a way that pulls us into the future. And so it made it better, made my argument better, made my understanding better to realize that also that's what a lot of people don't want to hear. And the narrative that's emerged now when we see leaders come through the program is, I don't know, but I do know that we can work it out together. And all of a sudden it goes from inaction to action. It goes from individual to collective. And it goes, and you're like, oh, and the first time we heard it, it was like, right, that's it. And so now that's how we finish every talk, big fucking letters. The only way to be honest about this is we don't know. And the only way to keep moving and step into a better future is I don't know, but we have to work it out together, which aligns very much, I think, with what you're saying, John. And for us, it's the biggest, and it's been played back to me in interviews in this last few weeks, even people we started working with. And they said we just shifted our expectations from expecting our teams to know it all. And we just realized that's not the case, can't be the case. But we just hope that they think they can learn it all. And you've got this nice, like, okay. And also at the beginning, we really want skills of confidence and curiosity for this unknown time. I mean, it's confidence and clarity. And that's really shifted to collaboration and curiosity. So it does feel like there's a shift that we've beginning to achieve, but it's only because we bang this drum that it's got to be emotional as well as cognitive. You can't just win the argument in a clever way. You have to bring people in the point where fear and those resistors come from. Because otherwise, if you don't address that, you run into creative resistance. And that's human beings at their absolute creative best. When they say they want to do something, but deep down they don't want to do something, then the fucking arguments they come up with are, pretty hard to negotiate.
I guess for me, so this is bang on for me. And maybe applying it to so what does that mean we do in our day-to-day lives? And I think it is like write to your MP and the individual actions can add up. But I think it's also like know that is not the so my like if someone asks me how do you be a good citizen, what's your prescription then, what are you saying people should do, my answer begins with like choose the domain that you want to contribute to, the domain you want to shape. Like it might be your local community, might be your workplace, might be whatever. And then the second step is not like write to the leader. The second step is find the others, like create the space for because there will be others. And I think like and then and only then like decide what you want to do together and decide within your own like within what you can do, like build the thing. Like I'm a huge fan. It's the backstory of the Taiwanese government thing is actually rooted in a hacker movement called GovZero that started by creating parallel websites to government websites where they all they basically decided what they thought the relationship between citizen and state should look like. And then at a big protest moment, they became like the people who led that hacker movement basically got invited into government, and then were the ones that led the COVID response. The point being, like you don't. I think we're in a moment where like the work is in community, and to try and either do it alone, which is part of what the consumer story has told us, that agency is always individual. Agency is about what you choose or don't choose, rather than who you find and how you build together. Like that, the work is in finding the others, building, and it's the expression that I really love. The Buckminster Fuller, the mid-century architect change maker, had this phrase, said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, you create a new model that makes the existing obsolete." So the stories that I am platforming, that I want to tell more of, that I believe actually hold the seeds of our future if we can connect them up and make them into something whole, are not the stories of people campaigning to change what the existing systems and structures of power will do, but they are the stories of people organizing in their communities to build what they want that to be. They're the stories of East Marsh United in Grimsby and Colville Can in the Midlands, and the East Quay guys who built a kind of museum come gallery come hotel on the harbour and watch it in Somerset. They're these stories, and they're workplace stories of people like are identifying how they want their organization to be and then challenging the leadership of the organization to step into that, rather than the stories of people saying, starting by like asking the leader to do, the existing leader to do something different. It's us stepping into our own leadership that I think, and doing it together, that I think is the most powerful. I guess because when I scale up to the macro and to this moment in time, and like let's look at the US, because the binary is more obvious and more simple and more terrifying, frankly. But you have a very obvious choice at that. If you only think to the sort of how do we relate to our existing leaders, you have a choice between, you risk being left unless there is an alternative space created, an alternative story created. You risk being left with a binary choice between the status quo that you, and this is maybe where I would challenge some of what you were saying, Sam, because I think where we're getting to is we're at risk of getting to a situation where actually the status quo is the unstable thing. The people know that they feel unsafe now, and the strongman leader is then offering at least it's a lie, but offering a promise of stability. And now that we are in that situation, the game, I think, has changed. I'm going to shut up because I'm talking too much.
Is the tie, so if we're looking at individuals coming together, collaborating, if status quo is the unsafe norm, does this lead back into the area of creating more of our own certainty by taking action? So it's this idea that, so like you were doing, Sam, in the early days with Liberty, I see something I don't like, but rather than have someone me push this off to someone else or someone higher up the hierarchy, I'll do something about it. And what you were saying, John, about creating something that you'll find others to join you on that mission, does that lead into, I'm creating more certainty, more direction, more momentum to go against the status quo? Is there something in that links back to your research as well?
Yeah. And I realise we're treading onto, it is on dangerous ground, right? And there are some pretty malevolent forces, and there isn't a strong counter narrative that has got large ideas. It's quite hard to point to, other than things like you, John, I think. Otherwise change is represented by Keir Starmer, which is a pretty sorry picture of change currently in this country, and the imminent disappointment that there shall be. The danger, though, is, like, I think the status quo is often unsafe because it will often operate in its own interests over that of the individual, and we'd fall into the same trap thinking, oh, previous status quos weren't as bad as this status quo, but there's a notion there that it'll always end up defending itself over you. And I see your point, like trying to hold this in a slight sense of workspace, but also of community and society and all the different microcosms that represents. by asking people to come forward with their ideas of how we unfuck this and make it better, you run the risk of it being like the ideas teapot, you know, that empty place in every single office where nothing gets put. All right. So it's not, and it's not that everyone doesn't have ideas, because go and put them in a pub or follow them home, and they'll be telling their partner how they should change work. But the ideas team, you know, suggesting that it's just this, you know, smart conversation where we put our ideas, it doesn't take into account the reason people don't put ideas in that bloody pot. They don't believe they're going to be listened to. They don't fully know how to articulate them. They don't believe in their own capacity to articulate the ideas. They would hate the idea that they were then given the chance to bring that idea to life. Like, and so I'm fully up and ready to stand behind and fight for the idea of proactive revolution, of advancement of these ideas, to stand against the forces that I think will take us in the wrong direction. But the part of that brief has to be to address the limiting beliefs. And so I think as much as there's need for a broader, wider, you know, you inspired me, John, both in terms of Taiwan, but also the Velvet Revolution, ideas that really stick with me, where there is collective shift. I think there's a need to address the need for like 9 billion inner rebellions to take place at the same time. The world of Be More Pirate taught me that without, you know, the rule everyone gets back to that they need to address first is the rules of their own and limitations, the stories we tell ourselves, the reasons that you can't do it, that life has to be endured, not enjoyed. And so the question we always, you know, and you move that notion that rule breaking is a scary thing to do, to a liberating thing to do, to a responsible thing to do. Then I think we begin to work together on that you're then bringing people with you. Because if it's truly going to be everyone, right, then we have to understand the reasons why most people but find it difficult to get on board and are then pulled back into strongman stories, because they appeal to both the cognitive idea, might be missold that this is better, but also the fear-based idea. And I go back, you know, you're right in pointing out that safety versus certainty is the most dangerous premise of all. The other part of our research that comes out when we're looking at 2024, these predictions that we'll share with you, Michelle, so they can sit with this podcast. Given the opportunity of things being different or growth, people are willing to sacrifice growth totally. They're like, I don't need any more growth. I'm done, thanks. just if everything can just stop right now, I'll take that. It's like 67% of people that have come back to us. Whereas at the same time, 59% of people assume there's going to be nuclear war. Like, so they're living with fucking fear. And the acceptance and acknowledgement of the emotions that come with that, the things that stop us, you know, that can bring out the best of us as human beings, but also bring out the worst. Don't know how we got there from ideas teapots, but they all kind of string together.
Cool. That was an interesting journey. And I also wanted an ideas teapot, please, James, in our workplace. That sounds like fun.
Yeah. Don't. There's a good alternative to ideas teapot where there's a thing called Sideways 6, and it's like from the frustration of the ideas teapot being this vacuum of the ideas that are needed. This guy, lovely guy I know, invented a bit of technology for eliciting ideas in organizations, and it's incredibly effective. And that might be an interesting thing to look at. How do we get these ideas in a collective sense, like the Taiwanese example, but in organizations, in other places? So those ideas then, you know, with this piece of software, it adds a degree of democratization to it, because the ideas teapot is ultimately an individual. And then there's a guarantee that they'll be surfaced in important meetings and spaces. So it's a really good, actually, I hadn't thought about that. It's a good example of citizenship in progress and a way of unfucking work that then fits into the systems of work. So it means that ideas get heard.
So he's the guy.
I think that this for me is where the hope is, actually. Like, if you these sorts of things are being developed everywhere. Like, once you start to look for them, because you tune your radar away from which of the options is the better option, and once you accept the sort of the starting point that none of the options on the table at the moment are very good. That's a terrifying thing to say, and yet suddenly, once it's said, it's an incredibly empowering one. Because and not least because then you start to go, so what else is going on? Like, who else is sort of acknowledged that realization? Who else is working from within that? And you find things like, I mean, I immediately thought when you were talking about that example, did you say it was called Sideways 6? there's an equivalent in schools called Smart School Councils, which basically is a software platform that enables every student in a school, primary or secondary, to be involved in the decision making, because the entire thing they were reacting against, the people who developed this thing, was the idea that it's always the same kids like me who end up being the prefects and on the school council and stuff, and we need to stop it being people like me. And it's like and I could talk about workplaces, I could talk about communities, I could talk, like, once you start to go, actually, I choose to acknowledge that everything that this is that the choices aren't going to be enough, that this isn't going to be solved by electing whatever, or moving to a different ad agency, or and you start to go, we actually are you acknowledge and accept the challenge of living in a moment where we are like reconstituting, we're having to reimagine and redevelop, like, everything. And then, like, that the idea of stepping into that mindset is incredibly overwhelming, but the moment you actually do it, you're like, oh, cool, like, there's so much. And I think some of what I'm wrestling with at the moment is how to be that, how to be a voice of that in the most in the way that, as you're sort of challenging, Sam, like, makes it feel as joyful and safe as possible. Like, not just joyful because joy isn't enough, makes it feel like possible, because it is.
Yeah, I really like that notion that work and life isn't supposed to be endured but enjoyed, and that is a goal in itself. It's taken me a lifetime to get to that, and there is a liberating acceptance that comes with it. I think you said earlier on, like, the only certainty is death, and I don't think that's the case for many people. I think the certainty that they go towards is, it's Netflix or getting drunk or scrolling. That actually, the reality is that that's a certainty. Death doesn't represent a certainty; it represents fear. It's Pema Chodron, isn't it, who says the only actual truth is uncertainty or death. So the choice is when you're going to wake up and grow up, which is quite a tough thing for a Buddhist monk to say. But the notion that you're not going to fix democracy, although if I was going to bet on anyone, it would be you, and Michelle and James, you're not going to fix work, but if I bet anyone, it's going to be you in your lifetime, in any of our lifetime. And I think that's one of that scary thought to me, because I've grown up in a story being, right, you have to see your results, you have to make a change, it's going to be that in front of, and we haven't fully come to terms with both the limitations and the limitlessness of our power. And what you were saying, John, there makes me think of, like, the kind of cathedral building analogy, that we are in this fantastic opportunity. Very few generations get to live through collapse. And rather than that be terrifying, you get the chance, I think, John, you just used the word as well, to lay the seeds of the things that are yet to come. And your work, Michelle and James, and unfucking work, is to pull as many plugs out as we possibly can. So as the generations that are going to come back and do things better, there's both more chaos and more creativity afforded to them to do so. And we know that we're laying bricks to be built upon, not necessarily trying to complete it, because that becomes the impossible task through which you're going back to endurance rather than enjoyment.
I'm gonna have a lie down after this and listen to it on slow repeat. Like, yes, that's brilliant, and then the next thing comes, and then, yes, it's brilliant again. I'm like, well, forgotten the last thing, so that's great. So interestingly enough, James and I are going to sit down over the boring bit between Christmas and New Year and plan my book number 2 and James' book number 1. And effectively, it's what John said about him being such a good student, a good boy, and looking at why 3-year-olds are creative, boundless energy, joy, fun, find the game and adventure and everything, why we put them through the school system and into employment. And then you have at the other end, people who are just wanting to go and get pissed on the weekend, and employers are whinging that nobody takes responsibility and nobody has any innovation, and what that looks like, and unpicking that. So that's book number 2.
I applaud that, welcome that very, very much. As soon as I saw what you'd done with Good Girl Deprogramming, as like I say, from my perspective, not only as a father, but as an interested citizen, it does, like John's work, those are the points. Those are the points in which people need to pull the fucking wiring out. And you're not necessarily going to do that knowing what all the answers are going to be, but that feels like a good, responsible rule to break.
Yeah. But yes, we're not going to sit there and go, this is how you do it, but this is like, these are the questions you need to ask yourself.
Maybe that'll be my sort of final word, as it were, that I'll contribute. I think because you were talking about like what tips can people go away with, and maybe I'd like to think there's a few in there, but we've probably talked at some quite big levels as well. But I think if I have one thing, is to shift from answers to questions, and for people in places of work, like whether it's looking at your peers or whether it's like what you ask of your leaders or whatever, like questions are incredibly powerful things, and answers are generally fake at the moment. So I think like thinking questions, not thinking in answers, I think is probably like hopefully as tangible as I can try and get right now where my head's at right now.
No, love it. Thank you. Have you got a final word, Sam?
Yeah, I'm totally with that. Although now I'm surprised that you weren't so into my idea about creating more availability between the two states of approach and avoid, because that's fundamentally about asking questions. But there you go. The thing that I've learned this year is within the communities of Be More Pirate and this idea of how we break rules. And I think this is a really important tool and skill set for the coming years. And what I've observed, and one of the best ways of doing this, and it very much would sit alongside the idea of someone asking Johnny, what is the first step into being a citizen and understanding your dominion, the space in which you want to make effect, and finding your crew. There's a classic line, which is, it's better to seek forgiveness rather than permission. And I think I've got an update for that, because having had to seek forgiveness many, many times, it's not really an enjoyable state, and often, creates quite a lot of conflict to get there. And what I think I've seen now is it's better to set precedent than seek permission. And this is from the effective pirates that we've seen. So they have an idea for doing something different in their society, community, or work. They decide a small prototype that might cost very little money and very little time. But rather than go and ask for something, say, we want to do something differently, and that scare their bosses and all these emotions we've talked about, or whoever it is, and then say default no, because they're scared of something new. Instead, it's to say, I've had an idea to try something different, and I've done an experiment. I've tested it out for a week. I've asked 10 people. I've spent 50 quid on, whatever it is. And here is my precedent. Rather than ask you permission, I've set a precedent. Now can I build on this? And it's encapsulated the work of being a pirate for five years or so more. And that's where we're seeing the really effective rebellions take place. And it means you're sharing the risk with the seniors around you. I've taken this forward slightly. Now these are my initial results. What can we do on the back of it? And it feels like it, as I've seen it more and more, it's like, aha, having revealed to me some of how this idea of rule breaking really works. So I hope that is useful to anyone considering how the fuck they do unfuck something. Rather than get ready to seek forgiveness, better to find a way to set a precedent than
love that.
Yes, little tiny mischievous experiments. I wonder what if.
Yes, mischievous experiments, a good way of saying it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you ever so much for joining us today. We've absolutely loved it. But yes, I'm looking forward to listening again, because half of it I didn't get. But yeah, I'll get on the second listen through.
Thank you.
Lots
very
of love
much,
to everyone.
Yes.
Love
have a lovely
you too, John.
Christmas.
Thanks, all of you.
period. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.